a way of correcting and stopping some of the issues and challenges that are facing our people today?
As it relates to solutions, there's two. One is proactionary and preventive, and the other is reactionary and based on coming in after the problem has been created to do something about it. Let's start with the proactionary institution. If you look at most of what America uses, at least 50% of the inventions that made this country famous came out of the minds of African Americans and came out of our minds before we was allowed to go to school with white students. I think that we have to rethink our push for school desegregation. I think that we have to go back to building our own schools for our children. We have to look at our definition of education. Up until now, the definition of education for African American youth has been to teach them how to function within the American social order, how to be a part, how to be an employee. That needs to change. My definition of education is the art of teaching children how to acquire, protect, and maintain power. In other words, I am not interested in preparing my child to work for Microsoft. I'm interested in preparing my child to build the corporation that's going to rival Microsoft's dominance in the computer age. So we have to shift from working for people as opposed to dominating the industries. 5 sciences need to be taught to African American children that I don't see being taught by any school in this country, not all at once, be it private, public, parochial, or charter. Number 1 is agricultural science. There is no culture without agriculture. Our children have to be taught how to grow their food, and they must also be taught agronomical science so they can actually test the soil to make sure that the fruits and vegetables that they do grow actually have some nutritional content in them. So that's number 1. You got to be able to sustain life. Our people are dying from all sorts of preventable diseases. Most of our deaths are not natural deaths. They are preventable due to poor diet, poor nutrition. Agricultural science helps to deal with that. The second science that should be taught is nutritional and dietary science. In addition to learning how to grow the food, you have to know when to eat, how to eat, and what to eat. Okay, you go back 75 years ago, there was breakfast, there was lunch, and there's dinner. Now you have African Americans eating all day long, never giving their stomach time to rest. And the research showed that there's a direct relationship between how often you eat and how long you live, even if you do eat healthy. The third science is political and military science. Our children don't just need to be taught history. History is important, but it's not enough. They have to be able to relate it to the present. So history and political science goes together. History, our experience of the past; political science, our experience of today. Why is there a mass incarceration project going on amongst African American males? Why don't public schools work? What's going on with black male-female relationships? And are there some outside influences that's contributing to the destruction of the African American family? We need our children to be politically conscious of what's being done. Why is President Obama president of the United States? And is it necessarily a good thing for African people, not just here, but in Africa as well? Then we also have to teach them economic and financial science, the science of money. African Americans are financially illiterate, even those of us who are well educated, financially illiterate. I want our students to be able to build multinational corporations, to be able to invest in the resources under the ground of our mother continent of Africa and bring them to ground so that they can be used to rebuild our race internationally. Military science, so they can understand military strategy. The black community globally and locally is at war. There's war against black men. There's war against black people. You see it every day with the abuse that we suffer from the police. We just had a situation in California with a former officer Dorner, who actually wrote a letter, detailing the racism that he experienced on the police force in LA. Our children need to be taught these things. They also need to be taught spiritual science so they can understand their connection to the divine. We are a divine people. And so astrological science and the teaching of ancient African spiritual systems above and beyond Islam and Christianity, I think, is going to be key towards our resurgence in the modern world. And the last science is the science of the black family, the science of the black man and the black woman. The black man has forgotten how to respect his queen, and the black woman has forgotten how to respect her king. She has to be taught the black man as a science, and the black man has to be taught the black woman as a science. Those 6 sciences are going to serve as the cornerstone for a global African revolution and renaissance, and they're not being taught right now. So the preventive solution is to build our own schools. It is not realistic to expect middle-class white women to properly educate black boys. It is never going to happen. Now, let's talk about the reactionary things that we can do. What we can do right now as the situation is. Black parents need to organize themselves into an independent Black Parents Association. Independent means we don't take money from other people and we don't allow others to participate in our organizational efforts. That's been a big mistake of African American people throughout our history. You look at other groups in this country, they organize by themselves, as you're supposed to do. Family business is private, but not so with African Americans. We include everybody to our table and wonder why we can't get ahead because we're not doing things for ourselves and by ourselves. Every Black public school district in this country should have an independent Black Parents Association that consists of 4 committees. Number 1, Special Education Committee, to investigate the special education abuse of Black children and also to investigate how the special ed money is being spent. Special education is a business, it is a hustle, it is a racket. Whenever I diagnose a child with a disability and place them in special education, the school district gets extra money every year that that child is in special ed. That money should be spent on those students, but we find that it's not. It's being spent on everything but those students. The second of the 4 committees should be school discipline. United States Department of Education just came out with research a few months ago that said African American boys are being suspended and expelled for the same offenses as white boys, but in an excessive fashion. Okay, so clearly there is academic racism there because even the United States DOE is saying that it exists. We have to investigate which schools are doing it, which teachers are responsible, which principals are responsible. Let's step in and do something about it. Third committee, school finance. Where is the money going? My argument is that money is not our biggest problem in education. It is not. Yes, you can always use more money, but that's not why our children are not learning. We don't have a budget crisis. We have a spending priority crisis. If you notice, the football team always gets what they need, and the basketball team always gets what they need, but the students in the classroom don't always get what they need. I would argue that although we have a budget issue, more money is needed. The bigger problem is the priorities upon which the district and principals are spending their money. And the 4th committee is school policy. There are local school policies that are in place that detrimentally and negatively affect African American children. I'll give you an example. In some school districts, if you use profanity or make a threat against someone, you're automatically referred for school expulsion. Those should not automatically be expellable offenses. They might be suspendable offenses, but to remove a child from an education for the rest of their childhood, we have to really look critically at these types of policies, the 0 tolerance policies that get you kicked out of school if you bring something to school that even remotely resembles a weapon, even if you have no history of misconduct in the school. So we need a policy committee to investigate. Those 4 committees organized by African Americans who are economically independent of the school district, but come into the school to work with the educators and lawmakers to bring about necessary change could get us some progress until such time that we build our own schools. And there's no reason why every African American child in America cannot go to a school that is run by their own community. African American people in this country gross $1 billion in the American economy. We are the richest group of Africans on the face of the earth and the 10th to 12th richest group of people on the face of the earth. And with that type of money, we could build all the schools that our children need, so there is no excuse. We could take our Christmas money. Philadelphia, we spent $3 billion on Christmas gifts. New York City, $8 to $12 billion on Christmas gifts. We could just take our Christmas money and build a new educational reality for our children.
In building those institutions, the pushback will be, well, first of all, I want my child to have a wider exposure. And if you're saying that it's not the environment, it is the instructor, why can't an instructor who's not African American, who is committed, who believes the children can learn, would not be suitable in the classroom? And what do you say to parents who are concerned with their child going to school and coming home safely? We're looking at least 5 deaths in this area that have occurred with young people on school grounds or going to school, coming from schools. There's a lot going on in the community where you would have parents say that it's not just going to school. There is a whole environment that is so detrimental and so toxic that before we get to building a school, we have to get to having a community. We have to have some kind of understanding that the spirituality you talked about, that a life is valued, that a life that looks like you or doesn't look like you is valued. And how do you get to those challenges? And additionally, you're sounding excellent, and you're sounding Sankofish, looking back to go forward, because we had that kind of mentality and drive where we wanted our own schools, and we shipped school students through it who came out excellent because they had that loving environment. But how realistic is that, to go into a community and say that you have got to build a school in order for your child to learn, if your position is that what you really need are teachers who care?
First, I would say that any teacher can teach an academic skill if they're committed to the child. The issue is not that white educators or Asian educators or Hispanic educators can't teach African American children. That's not the issue. The question is, do they come to the table with the commitment and compassion to reach those children? That's number one. Number two, it also relates to your definition of education. If your definition of education is only the imparting of academic skills, teaching a child how to read, write, and do arithmetic, any teacher of any color can do that. But if your definition of education is like mine, which is greater than reading, writing, and arithmetic, and is about preparing the children of an oppressed group of people to actually take back power and how to survive an unjust society, okay, that cannot be taught by somebody who didn't experience it. Only a black man can prepare a black boy for how to deal with racism in the moment. When you're pulled over by the police, don't react emotionally, young man, okay? Simply speak to him by calling off the numbers on his badge ID, and you refer to him as that. Yes, Officer 3519, how can I help you? Did I do something wrong, Officer 3519? When a teacher disrespects you in the classroom, you don't respond. You put that down on paper, and you give it to your parent, and then it's your parent's job to come back and fight that war with the teacher, not you. You're a child, and you have to be respectful. We who are black men, we've been through that. We can teach it. Can't no white man teach a black boy how to deal with white racism. Just like can't no white woman teach a black girl how to deal with the effects against her self-esteem that she's going to have to deal with by her skin being dark or her hair being curly or kinkled. So there's a lot that has to relate to education, including knowledge of self. That cannot come from someone from outside your community. It has to come from the inside, if that's your definition.
But why should that be the school's job? My position is, and I want you to address this when it comes to responsibility of the community, shouldn't our children leave with all of that? Why are we going to send a child to an institution to have them teach self-esteem or to the value of your beauty or how to do the things that you've vocalized? Why isn't that done before the child even gets to the school? Because if your position is they're not compassionate or there is not that loving, nurturing environment, why would we even wait for those type of very important core value things to be taught in an academic institution?
Very good question. Here's the key from my perspective. Education is a community institution. That's exactly why I argue that we need to build our own schools for our children. Education is a function of the community and should be run, supervised, implemented, and administered by the community, not an outside group. So I don't think we're disagreeing there. I think we're making the same point. Because schooling is a function of culture, and because schooling is a function of the community, it should be done within that community. So that actually makes my argument that we need to build our own schools because only we can impart the correct cultural ideal and vision into our children. They can't get that on the outside. That's exactly the reason why we need to build our own schools.
Again, and we perhaps are agreeing. The only thing that I would say is I would like you to address more of the family issue before it even leaves for a community school. What are we doing within that family to, even if we're sending them to a community school? Because realistically, everybody in a community school is not going to be, we're not a people all on one page. We have different ideas about a lot of things. So how are we going to ensure that before the child leaves the door, the family structure, that nest is built there, that self-confidence is
I don't think those things are separate. I think administering the education, administering the economics, administering the spirituality, and looking after the needs of the family are all aspects of the organization of a community. So I don't see them as separate. I don't see them as being in a prioritized order, as being hierarchical. I see them more as being horizontal, things that occur, because things that co-occur together. In order to solve our issues, we're going to need a multi-systemic multimodal approach, which means we're doing different things all at the same time. We're taking care of the family at the same time we're educating. We're educating at the same time we're employing. We're employing at the same time we're taking care of the psychological needs. We're taking care of the psychological needs at the same time we're looking at our political situation. So I don't see as one necessarily being more important than the other. They are simultaneously important because each is crucial to our well-being and future development. I would say this, our biggest drawback is our mindset, as you said, post-traumatic slavery disorder, the petty differences. And I think in order for us to get out of that, we're going to have to do what? Grow, raise an entire new generation of African children who are able to think the way that we need them to think. Going back to Dr. Carter G. Woodson's book, Miseducation of the Negro. What did he tell us? The college-educated black is seldom of any use to his race. The education he gets in college educates him against the best interests of his race. Before he went to college, he saw himself as a part of his community and saw himself as being proud of being a member of that community. But once he comes back from college, be it a HBCU or predominantly white school, he sees himself as different. So you have a schizophrenic political mindset being created in educated blacks that makes them liabilities as opposed to possibilities for their people.
You know, I think that maybe you do have some of that, but you also have those individuals like yourself and like myself who don't have that modus operandi, who are educating young people for the future in a visionary type of way, who understand that it's not just what you learn in the classroom, it's how you utilize that and what you're learning culturally as well. But you also have young people nowadays who don't have this view of, I simply have to be focused on being one thing, who understand that that one thing has implications and a wider reach. And I can take my Afrocentric, I can take my blackness, I can take my culture and embrace and engulf and be a benefit to my community. And many are coming back to that community and going into teaching with the idea of reaching a wider population and doing exactly what needs to be done in terms of not going in thinking that you're coming from a neighborhood and being oppressed means you can't learn. But what happens when there is that you have a lot of teachers going into Teach America or coming out of that program with this view that all children can learn and there are no excuses. It doesn't matter if you're coming from a broken home. It doesn't matter if you don't have any breakfast. It doesn't matter if you're hungry or dirty. We're plowing ahead and you're going to learn anyway. Well,
I take issue with programs like Teach for America. Because what these programs do is they bring into our schools a lot of uncertified young people who hold bachelor's degrees, who don't look like the students that they're teaching, and they are not recruiting enough African-American teachers, male or female, and particularly male, to come in to get these emergency certifications and teach our children. So I don't see those programs as a help. I see them as a part of the problem, and I discuss them in my book. If you're going to be giving out emergency certifications for people who want to come in and participate in urban education so they can pay their bills, not necessarily because they care about the children in front of them, where are all of the African Americans out there who have bachelor's and master's degrees who want to give back to their community and give back to their children? Why don't we see them being recruited for these Teach for America places? They're there, but they are not to the proportion of their representation in the general society. So you mean, and these programs also work against the hiring of experienced, certified black teachers. I'll give you an example. Let's say I'm a certified math teacher. Okay, I'm looking for a job. I can't find one. Why? Because the Teach for America programs then already filled up the vacancies with somebody who don't have my education, my expertise, or my commitment. But because they come from a certain program that's been pre-approved by the school board to actually fill these vacancies, me as a black man looking for a job, caring about the children in this community, can't get the job because it was given for an underqualified person who doesn't live in my neighborhood and don't care about the children that they're teaching. Those programs do not help our children. They are a hindrance, and they are simply an exploitative device to get people paid off the struggles of black children under the auspices that we care to.
Do you see African Americans going into these professions? How many African Americans on the college level are looking to teach, are interested in changing young minds? I mean, the field now is very controversial. The evaluation systems, the unions, different types of educations. Where are we going to get this new teacher who is really an old teacher? Because what you're talking about are teachers that taught the way they used to teach. And so how are we going to grow this crop of teachers?
I think it's easy once you control the institution. The reason why a lot of black males and females, for that matter, I just read an article recently where even the amount of African-American female teachers is down nationally, okay? And a lot of sisters have always wanted to teach. They're walking away from the education system, not because of the children, but because the way that they are treated by those who control it. Public education largely functions, okay, as an autocracy of middle-class European-American women. That's the way it's been, and that's the way it's going to stay until we build our own system or tear that one down and rebuild it. I'll give you an example. I knew an African-American male school psychologist. I was his mentor. He wanted to get employed. In fact, I know 3 cases in 3 cities, so this isn't just local. He wanted to get a job as a school psychologist. I said, go to that district because they don't have any black male school psychologists. They don't have any. He went there, sent his resume. I'm looking to be a school psychologist. I'm an African-American male. The district is predominantly black children. You know what they told him? We're not hiring any school psychologists right now. You don't have a single black school psychologist in your district. How do you find the nerve to tell a young upstart that you can't hire him because you're not looking for any? Then lay off one of those other ones and put him in there because those are his children, not yours. I know of teachers who went to districts claiming to have teaching vacancies, can't get a job, and then the next day someone who ain't got their qualifications is hired because they look like the teachers who are dictating policy in that school.
And this is where you would have the parents and with the policy issue and the awareness of what's going on to be more vocal, to be more assertive, to empower themselves to say, if our children are in these schools, we need to have teachers in positions that understand the cultural emphasis, that understand this and look like our students so our children can have a visual, can actually see what they can be.
Yes, indeed. The one thing that's always bothered me in discussions of education, not with you, but I have these regularly, is when people want to know why it's so important for black children to be taught by black people. Well, do you know that most white children in this country are taught by white people? Most white children in America never receive a single class by a teacher from another race. No one ever asks why it's okay for white students to be taught almost exclusively by instructors of their own race. But when we flip it around and say, well, we want the same thing for black children. Most of your children are being taught by people who look like them. We want most of our children to be taught by people who look like them. But when we say it, we got to justify it. It happens every day in white America. No one asks them any questions. So again, you see the white racism versus the white privilege that is inherent in almost any discussion that we have about this. But the other thing I want to underscore, getting back to Dr. Carter G. Woodson and miseducation of the Negro, it is the role, it is the neglect of the talented 10th. It is the neglect of the black bourgeoisie. It is the neglect of the black aristocracy. Not all but some scholars, not all but some pastors, not all but some blacks in the media, not all but blacks who have money, not all but blacks who occupy prominent leadership places, beginning with the president, who have been totally negligent about the war that's being taken place against African-American boys. We have not been on our job. And I really put a lot of this, a lot of the reason why black parents are not fighting back, because they don't know what to do. They need leadership. The leadership is the responsibility of the talented 10th. But the average elitist, well-trained black Negro is only interested in advancing his interests, okay, and the interests of his particular fraternity or church or social group. Look at our black professional associations. There's almost no war being fought to protect our children. What are the black lawyers doing about the juvenile incarceration rate? What are the black psychologists doing about the overdiagnosing of ADHD and the overprescribing of dangerous psychiatric medication? What are the black doctors doing about the poor health care of African-American children with so many of our babies being born stillborn? We have the highest infant mortality rate. What are these black professional groups doing except going around bragging that they have a doctorate?
I would think that there are so many who are doing a lot. I do understand that there's so much to do, but I would have to take umbrage with those individuals that you say are not the talented 10th, who need leadership and don't know what to do. There are too many activist parents. There are too many people who don't have degrees, who are very well aware of what the needs of their children are, who are fighting every day for their children.
But they need the resources.
Exactly.
And the educated blacks are the ones who have their fingers on the resources.
And it is wonderful that you are out there fighting that good fight. Thank you so much for visiting with us today. Thank you for coming to the University of